are not related to the mandate and mission of the organization, then I think that's not a good thing either.
All right. Professor Gao, your reactions before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, the distinguished panelist mentioned the issues around Palestine. Allow me to emphasize, Palestine is a very important country in the world of today, and Palestine is entitled to join all the international organizations. Any country try its best to exclude Palestine is not the right thing to do. It is against the megatrend of the world. Therefore, for the United States to withdraw from a very important organization like UNESCO based on membership for Palestine is, in my best judgment, the wrong thing to do. And the U.S. discrimination against the state of Palestine is one of the fundamental reasons why the United States is souring its relations with Arab countries and the Muslim countries. Therefore, on this very important occasion, allow me to emphasize the fact that the United States need to deal with Palestine in full respect rather than discriminate against the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, and to support UNESCO in dealing with a great nation of Palestine. That's number one. Number two is that, of course, the United States is still a leading country in science, technology, health, many things which are covered by UNESCO.
Yep.
And this is the reason why United States being a member of UNESCO is a very important thing. And I hope, first of all, the United States will never withdraw from UNESCO. Secondly, the United States will be a responsible member of UNESCO rather than being a spoiled kid in the wrong sense of the word, and really shoulder the international responsibilities on its own shoulder.
Okay, we have to leave it there for this topic. Many thanks to my guests, Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Tsinghua University, John Quelch, Professor at University of Miami Herbert Business School, and Anton Fidashian, Associate Professor of American School in Washington, D.C. When we come back, Japan released the 2023 Defense White Paper hyping up the China threat. How much of it is based on facts and how much of it is a justification? Stay with us.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point. Does Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida want to abandon decades of pacifism and make his country a true military power? The newly published 2023 Defense White Paper may provide some insights. Released after the Japanese government's approval of the new national security strategy last December, this white paper suggests that Japan is encountering, quote-unquote, the most severe and complex security environment since the end of World War II. But how much of that claim is fact, and how much is a justification for hastening their military expansion? What are the potential impacts of a more assertive Japan for the region and beyond? Is Japan's deepening of its alliance with the US and collaboration with other so-called like-minded countries going to produce a force for good, as it claims? I'm pleased to be joined for more discussion by Victor Gao, Chair Professor from Tsinghua University, Professor Ana Malindogui, Vice President of External Affairs of the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute, and from Moscow by Professor Anton Fidashian of the American University in Washington, D.C. So, Professor Malindogui, let me go to you first. Now, the white paper is yearly, but the defense strategy is every 10 years. How important is this particular white paper? And what's the biggest difference between this latest defense strategy compared to the one published 10 years ago?
I think the defense paper of 2023 of Japan is very important precisely because this is where we can see what will be the trajectory and what will be the direction of the Japanese government when you talk about military and defense. And as you can see, I think the big difference between the last 10 years and this year is basically if you really read the defense paper, it is synchronized and it's a mirror image of the national defense security of the United States. And as you can see, it's singled out China and even Russia and North Korea as its so-called greatest strategic threat to its security,
right,
which is 10 years ago, I think it was not like that. So that's one. And I think in terms of impact, it's very telling that this means it may provoke what you call arms race in the Indo-Pacific region or the Asia-Pacific region, which I don't think Asian countries would like to see in the long run, because that is not good for the region and it may create some kind of military confrontation among countries. It depends on the situation, which is very volatile at the moment. So that's what I can see with this new 2023 Defense White Paper of the Japanese government.
Mm-hmm. Professor Fidashian, what is your perception? Because as Professor Malindogui pointed out, China and then the DPRK and Russia are singled out as the biggest threats to Japan. And the reason for Russia, for instance, is the war on Ukraine, and that the Ukraine was not prepared to face off any such invasion. Therefore, Japan needs not to experience the same lesson. Do you see such fears grounded in facts?
The grim realist in me, tells me that it was fairly unrealistic to expect Japan, a nation with that kind of economic and therefore potentially military clout, to really be a pacifist nation for too long. Does that mean that it's turned away from pacifism as good? No, it doesn't, but it is inevitable. It's just the reality of international affairs. The problem is the way that it's being done and how Japan is being co-opted into a specific bloc. If it were emerging as a great power with all of the military strength that attends this kind of emergence inevitably, and if it were balancing in its own region between different sides, that would be one thing. What's happening, unfortunately, is that it is being incorporated into a United States-led bloc, and no one can possibly have any doubts about it. We just had the Vilnius summit of NATO on the other side of the continent about a week ago, and although Ukraine was at the center of everyone's concern, there were 4 Indo-Pacific nations present there, Pacific nations, and they were Japan, the Republic of Korea, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And NATO has already made it abundantly clear and done so publicly on numerous occasions that its long-term plan is to expand its influence into the Indo-Pacific region. And there's no secret about this. It always baffles me why the United States expects China to support the right of NATO to expand into Ukraine, despite all Russian concerns about this, when the same organization is already announcing plans to essentially expand in one way or another into the Indo-Pacific. And the fact that, unfortunately, Japan is becoming part of that expansion promises increased tensions in the Far East. And I have to tell you, if I were a Japanese politician, I'd be looking for intelligent ways to balance in my region of the Pacific instead of joining the bloc, because as Ukraine shows, this kind of bloc status, bloc diplomacy, results in violent overthrows of governments, civil wars, and then invasions. We'll see if the Japanese manage to find an intelligent, calibrated, balanced policy, but so far, unfortunately, they seem to be going in the other direction. Let's see what happens.
Professor Gao, what is your take on the question? Is Japan putting itself into greater danger by remarkably aligning with the United States in security issues and singling out China as the current, as unprecedented and the greatest strategic challenge, quote unquote? What is your take on all of the things that it listed about why China posed such a threat to Japan?
Well, first of all, when we look at Japan today, including the white paper and the defense strategy of Japan you mentioned, we cannot talk about it in a vacuum. We should connect this with what Japan did before 1945 and what Japan did when it surrendered unconditionally to several countries, including the United States, of course, but also China and the former USSR, and the pacifist constitution that it had been implementing since then. Therefore, for Japan to rearm, to try to push its political agenda through military means is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And it should not be tolerated and should not be allowed. Now, whether it is done by Japan itself on its own volition, or whether Japan was hijacked by the United States, for example, and increasingly binding Japan onto the bandwagon of the United States in pursuing the anti-China hostility, for example, that's another thing that all of us need to analyze very carefully. And also, whether the Japanese people who have been following the pacifist approach for decades now want to or have any interest in rearming themselves and try to make military adventures outside of Japan, that's also a very important question we need to ask. Anyway, I think the word of importance is that it will be absolutely against Japan's own fundamental national interest to become part of a bloc against other countries in this region, especially those countries which it surrendered to in 1945. Japan should never forget what it did when it unconditionally surrendered to China and to USSR, in addition to the United States, of course, in 1945. It should never forget the historical lesson that war for Japan is a dead end, and war for Japanese people would be a disaster in 1945, as well as whenever Japan wants to rearm and pursue its political goals through military means. Therefore, I appeal on the Japanese government to forget about rearming itself. It should use wisdom, diplomacy, negotiations to achieve its goal, rather than becoming a military instrument played by another big country like the United States. Against whom? Against China and countries like Russia. This is a futile attempt in its nature. It will be completely disastrous for the Japanese people if it is really implemented.
Professor Malindo Gui, I want to get your reaction, because the white paper really cites at least 8 aspects why China poses the greatest threat to Japan in terms of security, including what China does around its island province of Taiwan and what Chinese aircraft carriers are doing in the Pacific Ocean. What do you make of all of these? From the Chinese perspective, these are ridiculous claims, because what China is doing to the province of Taiwan, how come it has to do with Japan? And let's not forget, as Mr. Gao pointed out, Japan colonized in a brutal rule of the island for 50 years.
Yeah, that's actually a very important point that you're saying. One thing first, before I comment on the mention of the Taiwan question in the white paper of the Japanese government, is first and foremost, this white paper signals as well that, aside from the arms race that it may provoke in the Asia-Pacific region or the Indo-Pacific region, another thing is it might create division among Asian countries, which is not good for Asia at the moment, given that this century is what we call Asian century, meaning Asia is the center of economic development and prosperity. So that is not good for Asian countries. Second is it will escalate tensions in the Indo-Pacific region, which we see now, given the tensions in the South China Sea that is quite escalating because of interference coming from external powers like the United States. So with regard to the mention of Taiwan in the white paper of the Japanese government that was released recently, I see it as an over-the-top kind of thing on the part of Japan. And Taiwan is an internal affairs of, it's part of the internal affairs of China. It's a domestic affair of China. And we have to recognize the fact that if a country honors and respect what you call the one China policy, then they have also to be very true to their words by not interfering in the internal affairs of China. Because if you do that, then it creates a lot of tension and it will create a lot of problem. And I don't think China will blink an eye in trying to defend its integrity as a country. So for me, this is over the top, and I don't even agree. And I agree with Professor Gao that Japan should at least, rethink this kind of direction that they're taking.
We have to leave it there. Many thanks to Victor Gao, Anna Malingui, and Professor Anton Fedashian.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from Beijing, this is Global Watch.
Hello, it's noon in Beijing and 4 a.m. GMT. Welcome to Global Watch. I'm Dong in Beijing. First, the headlines. A suicide bomb hit a political party meeting in Pakistan, killing at least 44 people. Ukraine says it's planning to take the conflict into Russian territory, and Russia threatens to pull out its nuclear weapons. West African states give coup leaders in Niger a one-week deadline to give up power or face military intervention. Typhoon Doksuri leaves at least 25 people dead in the Philippines and brings heavy rainfall to Beijing and China's northern regions. A nice break. Athletes in Chengdu for the World University Games try their hand at traditional Chinese arts outside of competing. We start in Pakistan. At least 44 people have been killed in a suicide bombing at a political gathering of a leading Islamic party in northwestern Pakistan. And for more on that, let's cross live to our correspondent Daniel Han in Islamabad. Well, Daniel, tell us more about the latest casualty count.
Well, Tandang, the death toll from the devastating suicide blast has risen to 44, leaving over 100 badly injured. The incident occurred when more than 400 JUIF members and supporters had gathered under a tent in the town of Ar near the Afghanistan border for a workers' convention. Authorities say the bomber detonated himself in close proximity to the stage. Among the casualties was JUIF leader Maulana Ziaullah Jan. The Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province's Inspector General of Police says 10 kilograms of explosives was used with ball bearings and other materials. An investigation has been launched, but the situation remains tense. So far, no group has claimed responsibility for the incident.
When we reached convention and the speeches were being delivered on the stage, we were standing to welcome our leaders when suddenly there was an explosion, and then we lost consciousness.
There was a sudden blast, and within moments, dozens of people were lying dead or injured on the ground. After that, there was gunfire, and we shifted our leaders to safety. I can't say anything for sure, but there was sudden gunfire after the blast.
Well, Daniel, we have to mention the occasion of this suicide bombing happening at a political gathering of a major political party in Pakistan, in particular in that region. What does the investigation so far tell us?
Well, Pandang Bajor is a remote district bordering Afghanistan and was once a focal point in the global war on terror. Over the past few months, Pakistan's law and order situation has significantly deteriorated, with terrorist groups carrying out attacks across the country with alarming impunity. The militant group, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, whose talks broke down with Pakistan in November, has escalated its attacks, specifically targeting police in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and areas near the Afghanistan border. Meanwhile, insurgents in Balochistan have also intensified their violent activities, forming an alliance with the TTP. According to a recent report by the Pakistan Institute of Conflict and Security Studies, the first half of this year has seen a steady rise in terror and suicide attacks, resulting in the loss of over 380 lives across the country. The concerning aspect is that these attacks have predominantly targeted regions bordering Afghanistan, and Islamabad has accused some attacks of being planned on Afghan soil. Adding to the tensions, Pakistan has expressed serious concerns about the banned TTP finding safe havens and operating with freedom in Afghanistan. And
thank you very much. Our correspondent Daniel Han in Islamabad, and CGTN will keep you updated on this developing story in Pakistan. Now we turn to the Ukraine crisis. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that conflict is returning to Russian territory as his country's so-called counteroffensive makes headway. Zelensky made remarks after Russia says 3 Ukrainian drones were downed on Sunday, with 2 of them crashing into office buildings. Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, says Moscow would be forced to use a nuclear weapon if Kiev's counteroffensive was a success. Dasha Chernyshova has more details from Moscow.
The Russian Ministry of Defense has accused Ukraine of attempting to carry out an act of terrorism against the civilian infrastructure. We understand that 3 drones were involved in these attempts to attack the Russian capital. One of those has been crushed and destroyed in the Moscow region, in the Odintsovo area, and that's why there has been a temporary halt in the operations of Moscow's Vnukovo International Airport. Another 2 drones have been jammed by the electronic warfare, and the debris of those drones have crashed in the Moscow city area. This is the vibrant area where business corporations, some ministries are all having offices. But just remember, this is not the first attack by the Ukrainian drones against the Russian capital just over the course of this week. It is already the 3rd one. Earlier this week, we have heard about a drone attempting to attack the building in the area of Komsomolsky Avenue that is close to the headquarters of the Russian Ministry of Defense. It has not been immediately clear whether that was the target. There was another office building also hit during that attack. And then, of course, the Moscow mayor Sergei Sobyanin has been saying that another attack has been thwarted. All that taken place this week. And that's not the first attempt. We have heard before the attack of the Ukrainian drone against the Kremlin and even more. So certainly we understand the Russian authorities are noticing that those attacks are increasing, and the Moscow authorities are saying they're doing everything possible to beef up the security so that those drones are being jammed or destroyed before they reach their targets. We have heard from Russia's Ministry of Defense confirming that 25 drones have attempted to attack the Crimean Peninsula. We understand 16 of them have been killed with the fire of the Russian air defense systems. Another 9 have been jammed with the electronic warfare. But again, that's not the first attack against the Crimea. We have seen attacks earlier this week. An ammunition depot has been attacked by the Ukrainian drones, causing the halt to the traffic. And before that, we have seen there have been drone strikes against the residential areas in the Crimean Peninsula. So certainly we understand that those attacks by the Ukrainian are increasing, and that's why the Russian Ministry of Defense has been saying that they are aiming to attack the production facilities of Ukraine, the assembly points where the drones are being prepared and where the terrorist acts, as Moscow describes them, are being perpetrated.
Still in Russia, 3,000 military personnel have taken part in the country's Navy Day celebrations in St. Petersburg. President Vladimir Putin says 30 ships will join the Russian Navy this year. Leon Siyange has more details from St. Petersburg.
Big announcement at the Naval Parade here in St. Petersburg. About 45 vessels sailed through the Neva River. First of all, President Vladimir Putin commended his Navy force for their resilience and determination in protecting Russia and its outposts. But then, of course, that big one coming through of the addition of 30 combat vessels of various categories to the already existing more than 290 vessels that Russia has.
Today, Russia is confidently implementing the large-scale tasks of its national maritime policy and is consistently building up the power of its Navy. This year alone, 30 ships of various classes will be added to its fleet.
Now, specifically to that, of course, is the fact that this plays a very big role in what could be, especially where the vessels are placed, and specifically the Black Sea. Just last week, the Russian Navy force conducted an exercise that potentially is a sign that they could react to any vessels that are considered as military targets in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So definitely the show here, one of those significant moments and significant shows to the fact that Russia may definitely use vessels in the conflicts that currently exist.
West African nations have imposed sanctions and threatened force if Niger's military leaders fail to reinstate ousted President Mohamed Bazoum within a week. The 15-nation ECOWAS decisions came as supporters of the coup held protest in the capital Niamey and attacked the French embassy on Sunday. Ajak Mangut reports from Abuja.
The Economic Community of West African States, that's ECOWAS, chaired by Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu, has condemned the takeover of President Mohamed Bazoum's government in strong terms.
In the event the authorities' demands are not met within 1 week, take all measures necessary to restore constitutional order in the Republic of Niger. Such measures may include the use of force.
The ECOWAS is going to cut off financial support to Niger, to cut off trade as well to the landlocked country.
I want us to be strong, forceful, and resolute about the survival of Bazoum, as well as the freedom and restoration of the constitutionally elected body in Nigeria.
ECOWAS also suspend Niger from the regional bloc, as is the case with Mali and Burkina Faso when the military took over the governments of those countries.
As you can see, it was the people of Niger who came out to demonstrate their discontent with a policy that has lasted 12 years. I think things are clear. We are telling ECOWAS that Niger belongs to us. It's not up to an individual from ECOWAS to come and insult himself on behalf of Niger. We reaffirm our support for the army.
But the coup leaders in Niger have, warned against any military intervention from the ECOWAS, and they've called on citizens in the capital Niamey to come out and protest against any military intervention by the ECOWAS. We've seen the European Union and, of course, France cutting off financial support to the country. The US has also said it could do so. Niger, for example, is seen